So we move to the first substantive business of the day, which is item 8, the City Rail Link update. I will ask Barry Potter, Director of Infrastructure and Environment Services, to introduce the various presenters today. Before he does that, I just will signal that this presentation is going to be about the project itself. It won't delve into the various financial matters, which I understand an update on that is imminent, hopefully, and Barry will perhaps say a little bit more about that. Certainly in respect of this project, I think the Mayor's been quoted in the press recently about the impressive nature of the project, and that was a consequence of a 4-hour tour that I was fortunate enough to go on as well, and certainly the scale of what's occurring with the City Rail Link, and the size of the stations and the productivity of the workforces was impressive, as the Mayor said. But without any further ado, I'll hand over to Barry, and you can make the relevant introductions. Thank you, Barry.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for this opportunity. Online we have joining for a presentation that we'll run through Dr. Sean Sweeney, who's the the CE of City Rail Link Limited. We have Christian Meslin, who is at the table from AT and very involved in CRL. He's on the Project Alliance Board. And we have Dave Gordon from Kiwi Rail, who will also speak to us. So just very brief background where we're at and what's going on with CRL. Just a reminder, look, this would be the largest and arguably most complex infrastructure project undertaken in New Zealand for the last 45 years or so. The project's actually at a fascinating point. It's at a transition point. The civil works are substantially complete. The tunnels are finished. The stations underground are well on their way with construction. In fact, the civils component will finish pretty much around March, April next year. It then moves into the next phase. I've got to say that's really good progress given all the issues that have come along, and Sean will explain some of those around COVID and so forth. They've made very good progress. As we move to the next phase, which is when the project goes into systems, controls, fit out of stations, testing, commissioning and integration with the wider network, experience on other projects, similar projects overseas has been, this really gets into the tricky stage, and Sean, David and Christiane, I'm sure, will address that. They'll also share the lessons from those overseas projects and explain what the next phases look like. So really at that point, I'll hand over, but just before I do so, as the Chair said, this is about the project from here on. We're not addressing financial or detailed program matters from here. What is happening next Friday is that City Rail Link Limited will be providing a briefing to Mayor and ministers, and then after there'll be a process of bringing it to both Cabinet and to the governing body for consideration of any cost and program implications associated with what's shared next Friday. Need to remind also that under the sponsors agreement, all announcements around the project need to be jointly made by both sponsors, that's Crown and Council. We'll need to keep that in mind because that shapes how that process works after the briefing next week. So really at that point, I'll hand over to Sean. We'll control the slides here, so if you can just ask as we go through next slide, and we'll make the transition here. Thank you, Sean.
Just checking that you can hear me.
We can.
Well, that's wonderful progress. Apologies to everyone, to councillors. I'm doing this on my iPhone. I'm away in Queenstown, and turns out my computer microphone's not working, so it could be a little bit clunky, but it's good news that I am actually able to talk to you. Right, next slide, please. This is a presentation we gave the Mayor and others 2 weeks ago before the site tour we gave. So we'll cover basically just a bit of background, which will be, I'm sure, familiar to most of you. Progress, works we've completed. Then we'll talk more about the work that still is ahead of us. Next slide, please. Next slide. Right. Look, apologies for the graphics. This is one I made myself. I use it to explain to people why the City Rail Link came into existence. If you aren't aware, and most of you would be, Britomart Station is a terminating station. The Western, Southern and Eastern line all come together and go into Britomart Station, and at rush hour they come in with full trains and they leave with largely empty trains. And that has become a choke point and a limiting factor on the ability of the network. Things came to a head in about 10 years ago with Precinct Properties foreshadowing their desire to expand Commercial Bay. So there was really a window, an opportunity which would shut once Commercial Bay was built for Britomart to be turned into a through station. And so that's why Auckland Transport at the time progressed with the works, because it gave the ability to double the number of trains you can get into the CBD by making Britomart a through station rather than a terminating station. And when we increased the capacity to 9-car trains, that more than trebled the capacity of the existing rail network. That's really why what's behind City Rail Link. Next slide, please. Next, yeah. So this is really just an aerial shot. You can see it basically forms a wide loop that runs around the wider CBD and enables trains in both directions to run through Britomart, up through the city, 3 new stations, and then out to the southeast, east and west. Another benefit of this project, I believe, is you will actually be able to go around the wider CBD on a train, which will be a real benefit to the future growth of Auckland. And both Sydney and Melbourne have a city loop that you can circumnavigate the CBD on a train, and we'll have the same amenity here, which is great. Next slide, please. So quick overview. It's an extension of the existing Auckland network, 3 new stations, Te Waihoratu, Aotea as it's called during the project, Karanga Ahapi, and Mangao, Mount Eden. We used to say Mount Eden was redeveloped, but if you've been on a site tour, there's actually not a pebble that remains from the old Mount Eden station. It's a completely new station that's being built there. 1 redeveloped station, Britomart or Waitemata. There's also work on the wider network at Strand, Aotahuhu, Newmarket, and potentially Henderson. 3.4 kilometre underground tunnels, up to 40 metres underground, and a 100-year asset life. Ultimate capacity is 9-car trains, 24 trains per hour in each direction. Next slide, please. The benefits, it really does unlock the potential of the Auckland rail network. A train at least every 10 minutes in peak, and that changes the patterns of commuters once they know they don't have to look at a timetable. Increases the rail capacity from 14,000 to 54,000 people per hour. This is the equivalent of 16 lanes of traffic into the centre at peak, and doubles the number of people within 30 minutes of New Zealand's biggest employment hub, and greatly eases bus congestion in the CBD. Next slide, please. Okay, big projects run over a long period of time, and because of their size, they tend to touch most parts of the economy. We're not immune from some of the challenges that brings. There was the early transition from taking the project from AT to City Rail Link. That was a little bit bumpy at the time, but we're well through that now, and we have a very good and productive relationship with AT. We had a failed tender for the civils, the tunnels and the stations, with Fletcher's withdrawing. That caused a lot of challenges, having to reconfigure and reconvene that tender process. We then had our rail systems contractor, RCR, go into receivership. Obviously, for the last 2.5 years, we've had COVID impacts, and that brings with it the lockdowns, the closed borders, the resource shortages, supply chain issues, and flowing out of that, we've experienced severe price escalation since 2020. Next slide, please. Just a few observations, things that didn't quite go as well as we hoped. The original project development agreement, which frames up the relationship between the Crown, the Council and City Rail Link Limited, proved to be a very clunky document. That's been redrafted. The original procurement strategies were modelled off Crossrail in London. Their contracting strategy was something that performed very poorly for them. There were too many hard dollar contracts, too many contracts of any form, too many contractual interfaces. We've worked quite hard to consolidate all the contracts into one large alliance, which the Link Alliance is now managing, and that's helped a lot. Looked at Crossrail experiences. They were very clear with us about their contracting strategy weaknesses, the incentives, the lack of assurance on Crossrail, which led to some big surprises at the end of the job. And they made it clear one of their big failures was their transition from civil works to systems. We've taken all those lessons on board. We've had Mark Wilde, the ex-chief executive of Crossrail, visit Auckland for 2 days and spend over half a day in a workshop with City Rail Link and other time with AT and Kiwi Rail people. So I think as a collective client-side group, we're well aware of the problems that befell Crossrail, and we're doing our best to avoid those as well. One thing that we've done quite well is we've used Kiwi Rail to run construction management contracts for us. The Link Alliance is contracted to build the tunnels, the stations and the rail systems, but they're a very large organisation and they're not set up to do small contracts. We've realised that, so we actually use Kiwi Rail with support from AT to do a range of smaller contracts. One of them we're using them for is on the Britomart station at the moment. We also have strong links into Australia. There are very large metro rail projects happening in Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne at the moment. And there is a very full and frank exchange of lessons learned between those projects and ourselves. Next slide, please. So this is just the essential structure which we now have. We have City Rail as a company. We're moving to what we call a one client team. That's CRL, AT and Kiwi Rail. We basically are one entity. We are totally joined at the hip. We share interests. All our interests are in getting the best railway up and running for Auckland. There is a range of external assurance on the project. There is what's called an owner verifier, an independent safety assessor, an independent certifier, and the sponsors, which is the Crown and the Council, have their own separate assurance manager sitting over the top of us as well. And then to the right, we've got the Link Alliance, which has 3 client-side participants: City Rail Link, Auckland Transport and Kiwi Rail, and then the 6 firms that make up the Link Alliance. That's Vinci Grand Project from France, Saltanche Bashi, which is a subsidiary of Vinci, and Downer, and then the 3 design firms, WSP, ACOM and Tonkin and Taylor. Next slide, please. The status, as Barry touched on, we are moved, the civils are on track, essentially, and due to be complete early next year. We are moving from station and tunnel fit out into the rail systems fit out. The project is still hitting its key, if you remove the time for the hard lockdowns, its key project milestones such as TBM completion. However, in doing that and basically getting through the 2 years of COVID disruption, because as well as the hard lockdowns, we had the Auckland regional lockdown. We've had levels 2 and 3 and 3+. They all have had impacts on the job. And what we've experienced is we've now have had significant program compression, which means we have multiple critical paths or subcritical paths on the project. And that means that from here on in, if there's a delay on any of those paths, it has a high potential to delay the project overall. So our risk of delay, whilst we've managed to keep hitting our deadlines, the risk of delay has got a lot larger from here on in. The rail systems project is progressing, but there have been significant delays to date with the design of it. Next slide, please. As was mentioned, there is a briefing next Friday for the sponsors, where we will give an update on final forecast cost, completion date, and the impact that has on the current project funding. Next slide, please. So the work to be completed from here, very large fit-out project, really turning the tunnels and the station structures into a railway, mechanical, fire, electrical and hydraulic fit out, rail systems fit out, architectural and station fit out, and then we've got the energisation of the lines. There's a lot of testing in this project still ahead of us. All of that testing carries complexity and risk. There's site acceptance testing, rail systems integration testing, train running testing, and operational readiness testing. The rail systems, we are extending KiwiRail's existing network using AT's existing trains, and we have the Auckland One Rail operator embedded in the project as well, currently helping develop operational procedures. The technology, the City Rail Link will be run from a centralised station management control centre. We've got Honeywell integrated control systems, building management software, security and access software, emergency management systems, and a range of emergency measures inside the tunnels, CCTVs and the like. The rail systems are configured as for KiwiRail, and the IT systems are configured for AT's transport systems. And all the systems, the aim is to have them tested in a lab before we install them on site. Where the operational integration, we're using existing rolling stock along with more of the same rolling stock, I think, purchased this year. We're basically extending the existing railway using KiwiRail and AT control systems. There's also, I think as everyone will be aware, the Auckland area network. There's a massive renewal program underway in the wider network, which is required for the City Rail Link to perform at the level it's been promised. And I think the term people are using is we're turning the railway from a low intensity freight railway to a metro mindset. I'm going to go through these quite quickly, but from here on in, there's an enormous amount of effort put into the systems and the safety requirements of the project. We're going through a series of what are called safety gates at the moment. We've done the safety requirements, defined the safety processes. We've had the safety approval for the civils design, and now we're looking for the safety approvals for the systems design. That will then roll on to testing and then readiness for operations. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, I think I've jumped way ahead of you. Sorry. That's the problem when you're working off your iPhone. Go next one, please. Next one. Sorry about that. As I'll just say, no, yeah. So we're now, this is the safety process to date. There's 7 safety gates to go through. The first 4 are the responsibility of the Link Alliance. The last 3, KiwiRail and AT and Auckland One Rail, take a much larger role. So up to safety stage gate 4, you could say that's the end of the build. All the systems are tested and signed off and accepted. And then safety stage gate 5, that's the train running tests. Then we have emergency operating tests. And then we have performance demonstration. So there's a lot of work to move from a construction project into an operating railway, and I'm sure Dave and Christian will talk to you a little bit more about that. Next slide, please. City Rail Link and the Link Alliance are contractually bound to provide 24 trains ultimate capacity and 15 trains per hour at opening, and 18 trains per hour within 10 years. Obviously, there's a lot of testing required to meet those conditions, and there's a lot of work going on at the moment with both KiwiRail and AT around how we will meet those conditions. Next slide, please. Look, this is a lot of detail about the work around safety assurance that's happening. We're about halfway through the safety work we have to do, and we're well on the way to, I think, handing over what's required for AT and KiwiRail. Next slide, please. As well as the main works that the Link Alliance are doing, is that the last slide you have? I'm just sorry.
Yeah, need to go back one, Sean.
Yeah, go back. Right. Okay. So look, the last slide, the challenges going forward. Obviously, there is a very big issue with the Link Alliance at the moment, the impact on COVID to them. We have to resolve that. We're working through that, and there'll be a briefing to the sponsors next Friday about where we are on that. We will be needing to secure funding for the COVID impacts. Really, a big focus on the project at the moment is exiting COVID and getting the construction team back into a mindset which is not impacted by COVID every week, because it's been something they haven't been having to deal with for the last 2.5 years. Obviously, the challenges around rail systems installation, tests and commissioning, they should not be made light of. We're doing everything we can. We're, I think, eyes wide open, AT, KiwiRail and ourselves, but no one is suggesting that we have that resolved. There's a lot of uncertainty and complexity we still have to manage in the next period before we're comfortable. Another point I'd just like to make, and this is just a wider environment, Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne have 3 very large metro rail systems for completion in 2024 and 25. Australia has a huge pipeline of rail work. We don't have such a pipeline in New Zealand. We fight Australia for resources, and I think it would be naive to say that over the next 2 years we are not going to be impacted by the size of the workload in Australia and the fact that there are these 3 other metro jobs in Australia coming to completion at roughly the same time we will be doing. I don't know the impact of that. I don't know the extent of that, but I do know many of the people we use from now on in actually come from Australia to do the work we need. And we are already having talks with some of our specialist subcontractors, and they are trying to balance our needs versus their needs across the eastern side of Australia. It's not going to be straightforward, and it's going to take a lot of effort to get what we need. We're aware of it, but it would be, I think, inappropriate not to mention that as one of the complexities. And that's not been caused by anyone in New Zealand, but the environment we're in is a very, very busy environment at the moment. So there's still significant inherent uncertainty in the project from here to completion. That's not because anyone's done anything wrong. All the advisors we use have stressed to us we should not undersell the complexity from now to completion. And there's a wide spread of possible outcomes from here on in. We're doing everything we can to identify the risks and manage them, but it is an ongoing piece of work for the next 2 years. So it does still present real challenges being able to give highly accurate time and cost predictions at this point in time because of the variables. We're working on it, but there is still a lot of uncertainty on the job as of now. That's my portion over. Thank you.
All right. Thanks very much, Sean. I think it'll be, and I think the presenters have displayed a preference for maybe getting our presentations and then coming back at the end. So if you can just record the questions that you may have, we can put it to everyone at the end. So the next person up is Christian. Over to you, Christian.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Christian Meslin tuku ingoa. I am an engineer. I worked 25 years in rail and public transport for the for the private sector prior to joining AT and calling out our home 4 years ago. Worked on light rail, high-speed train projects in France, and most recently on Sydney Light Rail, Canberra Light Rail, and Sydney Metro Northwest. So at AT, I lead the teams who develop the public transport services and the public transport projects, and I am also playing the client integrator role on CRL, light rail, second harbour crossing, and the heavy rail projects. So next slide, please. So as Sean explained, CRL is the enabler of a transformation on our transport network, our rail network. It's like building the missing part of a roundabout in the middle of a rail network. Drawing the analogy with the Auckland Harbour Bridge, it's a short piece of infrastructure, but it delivers benefit all across the region, even not wider. So that will enable all trains to go through the CBD. It will give us total flexibility on how we run our train services, and it will shorten the journeys and increase the number of trains movement at Britomart. And by doing so, we are contributing to the emissions reduction targets. Next slide, please. So the railway without CRL, it's a dead end at Britomart. We are stuck with 23 trains per hour at Britomart, with trains turning back from the west at Newmarket. And for the record, the patronage on the rail network before COVID was 21.4 million. We are forecasting 12 million this year and 23.7 in the next financial year. The section between Papakola to Pukeko is closed for the electrifications, and while Link Alliance are doing works at Britomart, the Onehunga Line services terminate at Newmarket. Next slide, please. So when CRL open, as I said, we will have total flexibility on how we run our lines. That is the draft CRL Day 1 train plan. It is subject to further modeling and taking into account the new travel patterns. And we will go for consultation as soon as we have completed the modeling with the options. What is sure is that we will run 16 trains per hour in the CRL tunnels. That's the equivalent of 32 trains movement compared to 20 now at Britomart. Next slide, please. So in 2005, we were at 5 million on the rail network with the new electric trains, and we jumped to 10 million in 21 just before COVID, and that was in financial year 2019. As I said, we are down to 12 this fiscal year. Our statement of intent plans for 23 in financial year 24, and our long-term planning is around 30 million, 2 years after CRL open. Next slide, please. So the business case in 2015 envisaged 3 design cases just after CRL open with 16 trains per hour, giving a total capacity of 22.5 thousand passengers per hour per direction. By 2035, it was envisaged that we will raise the capacity to 18 trains per hour with additional trains, level crossings closed on the Western Line, and the start of the expansion to 9-car trains. And by 2045, full capacity, 24 trains per hour per directions with 9-car trains. We are refreshing with key rail, the program business case for the next 30 years. And those assumptions will be, as I said, revisited, and a new program business case will be submitted in May 2023. Next slide, please. So before doing that, we will open CRL, and we have broken down what it takes to be ready for Auckland Transport to offer new services into 4 levels of readiness. The first one is the completion of the Link Alliance scope. That's the main core of the CRL project. Level 2 is the readiness of the CRL project. Level 3 is the readiness of the rail Auckland network. That's everything else. And last but not least, level 4 is the readiness of the transport network. And I will come back to that later. Next slide, please. So when we will, I would say, complete the Link Alliance scope, that means we will have done the testing and commissioning and the integration of the systems on the CRL, and that will enable Link Alliance to be reaching practical completion. We've got other things to do I would say, be ready for, for the CRL, be ready for public operations. Then when we are ready for the rest on the rail network and our transport network, that's when we will be able to start the public operations. So there will be a delay between Link Alliance reaching practical completion, the CRL asset being ready for public operation, and Auckland Transport and our operator running trains on the new rail network. Next slide, please. So level 1, Auckland Transport is supporting Link Alliance by providing drivers, trains, and resource to do the testing and commissioning. So that's mainly through our rail operator, Auckland Run Rail, and our maintainer, Downer, the AMAS contract. That will enable Link Alliance to reach practical completion. Next slide, please. The delay between that and CRL being ready for public operation is mainly for, as far as it is concerned, about training the drivers. Auckland One Rail needs to train 250 drivers, and we will not be able to do that while Link Alliance are still working on the project and test and commission the infrastructure. So we will try to minimize as much as we can the gap, but we need to train everyone in order to be ready for operations. Next slide, please. So the next level 3, readiness of the rail network. That's mainly key rail. We are supporting that by integrated the new rail services in our systems, but also by providing trains. We bought 23 new trains that will be arriving for that time. And we are also, I would say, forced to comply with the rail regulations and to intervene on rail crossings, pedestrian crossings, and road crossings. And we need also to prove that the day one timetable is reliable. And next slide, please. And the level 4, mainly with AT, it's about making sure that these new train services are aligned with the rest of our public transport services and our bus timetables, but also with the road network around the stations, pedestrians, cyclists, and so on. We need to revisit the wayfinding because the lines will have new names, new terminus, and new directions, and also our maps and customer-facing systems. Next slide, please. We are integrated into everything that we are doing with CRL and KeyRail. We are integrated the key lessons learned from other major projects, the major one being Crossrail in the UK. As Sean said, a big, large rail project is one-third civils, and that we are now, one-third systems, the fit-out of the stations, and one-third the operational trials. We need to not underestimate the amount of time that we have to spend to deliver a perfect and reliable service at day one. We are working with Link Alliance on what they call the paper project. That's the safety case, the as-built drawings and everything. And it's a huge undertaking. And once again, we do not need to underestimate the efforts. And last but not least, one big lesson is even though we will know when we open, we shouldn't be announcing that because that creates a hard deadline that has direct effects on teams and safety and reliability. That's it for me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Christian. So just a final presenter. We better get to Dave before one of those trains maybe run him over the testing there. So over to you, Dave. Final perspective from KiwiRail.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Chair. Te rā, ko David Gordon, Tūāhanga. I'm KiwiRail's Chief Operating Officer for Capital Projects. Maya, could you go on 2 slides, please? Thanks. So what, councillors, you've heard from Sean and Christian is that you're doing an enormous investment in the centre of the city with immense capacity, but it simply won't yield the value that's there unless the rest of the network is up and running at the same level. And it was clear to us well back when this was being done is that the network would not be ready for City Rail Link unless significant investment was made. So it wouldn't have the capacity to sustain the service promise, nor would it have the ability to provide what Christian described as a headway timetable, which means the next train just turns up soon after the other one and it works like clockwork. So at that time, we actually sought a significant chunk of investment to go into the network concurrent with the build of City Rail Link. And you can see it on the screen. The capacity ones are jobs, the Wiri to Key Park, most of you, which sort of goes under the shorthand name of Third Main, the Papakura to Pukekohe electrification, and the fact that we're building another substation out west, Glen Eden Way. We also look to invest in creating an integrated rail control centre that's coming out of the ground at Ellerslie as we speak. Our operations, AT's rail operations and Auckland One's rail operations will be co-located in the same area, so we're able to offer what is a proper metro service. And the last item was the rail network rebuild, which is then called Ringham, which is obviously subject to some controversy at the moment. But the analogy I used at the time, and I continue to use, is that Sean was building something like a fire hose. At either end, it was feeding into a garden hose, which was the network, and the truth was that garden hose had some kinks in it as well. And we're working very hard to ensure when the fire hose is ready to open, it's feeding to something that has more. Sorry, Maya, you can go on, thanks. Also note, as Sean did, that CRL was funded for other network capacity investments, and you can see them there. And over time, Sean and I have agreed that we are better deliverers of those than CRLL, not because they're competent, it's just a different scale of operation and more suits to our scale, as we would say we wouldn't have the competency to build the City Rail Link. Like everyone, we had COVID get in the way of what was pretty logical progression, and we also had the rolling contact fatigue problem, which caused us to reschedule a big chunk of investment and timing. But if I move next one, thanks, Maya, I'll just give you an update of where we're at. And I think I've got a pretty good report card at the moment. In terms of the opening of City Rail Link and where we've aligned what we're doing with Auckland Council and Auckland Transport, Wirredi Park at the moment is actually 3 months ahead, which is a bit of a miracle given we've had COVID and the rest, but we've been able to introduce some technology that enables the contractor to be much more efficient. Papakura to Pukekohe, the new signalling system is fully commissioned. We can run trains on opposite mains, so we're able to shut small sections of line at a time and start putting in the masts for the overhead line to run the electric trains. I've got stations at Drury and Parata. We're up for consultation on each of those 2 stations, and pretty good alignment on Drury and excellent alignment on Parata with developers. Western Power Feed, I'm putting papers to board in the coming week on approving contract award for there. As I said, the Integrated Control Centre is coming out of the ground at Ellerslie. And in terms of readiness for CRL, I'm not belittling the challenges that both Sean and Christian talked about, but at the moment, I believe we are ready for what gets thrown at us. It doesn't say it's perfect, but we're going into this well and truly with our eyes open and appropriately resourced to deal with it. We've got 2 things that are challenges at the moment. The first is Middlemore Station, but we are in the very closing phases of mediation, which started with what was then Counties Manukau District Health Board, is now NZ Health, about the station, its alignment with the hospital, and how we get that environment sorted. I'm extremely confident that will resolve itself and we won't end up in the Environment Court. And you may not be aware, the location of Drury West Station is our decision making, and its location itself is under challenge from made developments. But the point I would make in both of those, ourselves and yourselves are aligned in terms of what we are trying to achieve. Thanks, Maya. We've got one area where we're not, and I'm not saying this because it's a dispute, it's just because we hold different views and we're trying to resolve the views between us. Drury Stations, the Drury Stations project currently funded 495 million from the NZ Up project, facing cost escalation issues like every construction project. What do you do? And there is a difference of view between ourselves and AT. AT's view is Drury Central and Parata more fully and defer Drury West. Our view is we would rather do 3 to a lower specification for day one. That's going to work itself. It's going to work itself through in the end. But at the moment, we're just in slightly different camps. And there's one area where the council's disinterested, and it's just getting power from Counties Power. Again, that is just a question of we want to take quite a bit of juice out of their network. What does it do to their stability? Do they have to do some upstream investments, and who should pay? These are commercial engineering discussions, but they're not disputes. They're just finding the correct path to go down. Next, Maya. So I want to touch on clearly probably the most controversial aspect of our development, and Councillor Lee and I have already had some correspondence between us and some discussions on this. But I want to tell the story here as we see it. And I know councillors have asked us to consider, Councillor Lee has asked me to consider alternative ways. So how did we get to where we are? And what are the decisions we looked at? So in the first instance, what's driving our thinking? And our thinking is this, is that City Rail Link will open. And I think the worst thing that we could conceivably do is open that, spend the $4+ billion on City Rail Link and all the other things, and then announce for the couple of years after that a period of network closures while we finish getting the network ready. To me, that is totally the wrong, to me and to KiwiRail, that is totally the wrong approach. So what we are trying to do and what's driving us is a desire to do a set of work on the network before City Rail Link opens. And I'll just go into that work a little bit more because I've been interviewed on the media a number of times about this. And I've said on each occasion, firstly, it's work that KiwiRail would have to do over a much longer period of time if there was no compelling or burning platform. In other words, we could do this, we could chip away at this over a 20, 30-year period and get to the end. However, the work of its nature is incredibly invasive and it's work you don't want to do. So whenever we do it, there will be levels of shut to do so. However, City Rail Link is coming. The network is going to get a significant upgrade in its capacity and resilience and reliability. And in our view, to not do this work and then to wait till after it opens and then have progressive disruption is wrong. And the third reason we're doing it this way is post the City Rail Link opening, we, KiwiRail, who have got an accountability to keep the network maintained, will have much less access to do that maintenance. At the moment, our maintenance is invasive and it involves shuts. We believe that is not going to be the way it's done in the future. We're going to have to re-engineer, well, we are re-engineering how we do the maintenance. We will get less time on the network and there'll be much more running of trains and much less time of fixing the network. That's the future, and that's the model we have to change to. Hence the unpleasant reality of having to do some fundamental works in the formation and the guts of the network, which totals building 25 kilometres of new rail in this contracted period. So we look really hard at how do you do this? Do you have full rolling closures, which is what we're currently proposing and working to? Do we have one-way operating? And that would involve keeping one track open, running trains one direction in the morning inwards and one direction in the afternoon, having something of a timetable, and basically either have a workers standing by, which I think is too dangerous because you've got power up, or basically workers not being on the track at any time during the day. Or we had the option of running this much longer, well past CRL opening. Current status is this. We have the first 12-week block from Westfield to Newmarket, which includes Tūāhanga simply because the Tūāhanga branch feeds into there. And during that period, we're going to do the work. Two, we want to build evidence on our actual productivity and opportunities. The longest we've ever had at closure on an Auckland network is somewhere between 18 to 21 days. So we know what we can achieve in that type of period. What we don't know is what we can achieve in a longer period, because if you have longer access, you don't have to disestablish the sites. And we want to learn a little bit more about our productivity. Does it have to be 12 weeks? Can it be shorter? We're also, during that time, look at the sequence on Westfield to Key Park, because the biggest chunk of the upgrade work is happening between Westfield and Key Park. Most of our network rebuild is there. It is an old part of the network and very challenging to get access to lots of bits of it. So we want, during that time, we're going to challenge the sequence of invasive versus moderate works, deliver the evidence from Westfield, what can we do, and we, at that point, reconfirm or amend approach, but they have to be shuts. At this stage, I cannot offer up anything different to what I'm offering at the moment, but we are not going into this blindly saying we've got our orders and this is where we're going. We need to learn and we need to adapt as we go. But be clear, the type of work we're doing, which is digging out potentially 900, almost a metre below the level of the formation at the moment, replacing that and building that, is not something you can do with a train running past you in 25,000 volts above your head. Clearly, we'll be open for the Women's Football World Cup for the matches. And as Sean mentioned, if Henderson Station improvements are funded, then we will also amend the rail rebuild sequencing out west, because I think, clearly if we're going to have a rebuild of that, we'd want to be doing the repairs at the same time and then opening to something new. Next one, thanks, Maya. So as I said, where is this driving to? And the network is going to change. The way it operates will change post City Rail Link opening. The way it's maintained will change. Fewer and far shorter blocks of line. Most of our inspections will be automated and digital rather than people, and much less invasive maintenance because we've done the rail builds. In other words, when we are ready to open this for the public, we want to open it and let people use it for the maximum hours every day of the year. Thanks, Mo. I'll just raise some other things because City Rail Link's, I guess, the big gorilla in terms of the development. But there's a lot happening in Auckland rail generally, just sort of ensure that councillors are aware. We're also working with AT and your own council officials. We are working with AT to build a joint business case, which says what does the rail need to be in 2045, a 30-year view of rail and what role it plays. We are working in-house at the moment and will be sharing with Ports of Auckland whether we have an opportunity to put much more containers on rail from the inland port either out to Southdown or to their inland port at Wiri. We actually did this in the past, looked at it, but at the time there was not a great deal of interest from Ports of Auckland. I think that is changing, and we'll be taking this up with the port, and we've spoken to the Mayor about this. I will leave there the level crossing issue. It's a big issue for Auckland City and Auckland Transport. There are still a large number of level crossings in the network. As rail traffic builds, congestion and queues and crossings will build, and the propensity for accidents will rise. It is a big unanswered question of how it's done. It's not just a rail program, it's not just a road problem, it's also an urban development problem, and in our view it needs to be addressed through those three lenses, and particularly the urban development opportunities that flow from a road closures or grade separation. Next one please, Maya, which was my last one. Just mentioned light rail. We're working with the Auckland Light Rail team. They know and we know that Southdown Avondale corridor is important for both of us. In the long term, if conventional rail is to grow in Auckland, which with the business plan will show, we need to get the freight trains out of Newmarket, which means we need to use the Southdown Avondale corridor. Light rail needs to use the corridor. We've got to find a way to coexist on that, and we're working with that team on that. And the final point I'll raise, and it's a bigger picture issue, at the moment the network funding model for Metro Rail in Auckland assumes that Kiwi Rail and AT pay 100% of the ongoing costs, proportionate to the share of the use of the network. And that share is based on some fairly well agreed international algorithms. And it boils down to AT paying about 90% and we pay about 10%. What we've seen in the past is that the level of investment in that network has led to the foundations of it and the rest are in decline. And you put City Rail Link in here, you've got a brand new multi-billion-dollar asset. The worst thing that could happen is that it isn't appropriately renewed and maintained through its life, so it doesn't get its value through its life. Now, just being pragmatic, that is going to put a significant cost burden on Council, AT, ourselves and others. GWRC have the same problem in Wellington. What is the funding model for that in the future? So that's a think piece that we are working on to resolve. because when we open this thing, and T-Rail will basically own the rail stuff, AT will own the stations, all of that's been confirmed. How do we ensure that what's in the picture behind me still looks like that in 100 years' time? So thank you, councillors and chair.
Thank you very much, David, and also to Sean and Christian. So we'll open it up. It's a pretty detailed and wide-ranging discussion on our rail neck, challenging but also quite exciting in its own way what's just down the line, pardon the pun. So the people we've got up first are Councillor Ferry, Councillor Henderson, Councillor Turner, Newman and Lee in that order. Councillor Ferry.
Kia ora, thank you. I've got a couple of questions. Some of them were answered as we went through the presentation, so I won't ask those. Firstly, just to sort of commend you for two of the presentations, there was explicit mention of what didn't work and what we've learnt from other projects and how to do things differently in the future. And I just wanted to commend you putting that on the public record and sharing that. I think that kind of approach is to be encouraged. From an elected member perspective, I felt there were some shortcomings and have been shortcomings continuing around comms. And I wonder if there was any comment on that in terms of the communication, particularly to the public, about how the project is progressing and what the benefits are when we get to the end point. That was my first question. My next question was just around 250 drivers needed for your trains. It's a highly competitive environment, as we're seeing with a shortage of bus drivers at the moment. So any plans you have to make it particularly attractive in that level, particularly noting that we will need a whole lot of bus replacement for trains during the RNR works as well. And then finally, if you see a role for Eki Tūnuku potentially in helping with some of that level crossing work, which I know is particularly important to Graham East, who I think is in the audience today. Those are my questions. Thank you, Chair.
I think that first question probably went to you, Sean, I think, and then maybe some other speakers can pick up the other ones. There you go.
Sorry, the first question, just to be clear, the first question.
That was in relation to any lessons around the comms work, because that seems to have been a shortcoming for how work is progressing to the public and the benefits when the project is complete.
Well, we put a lot of effort into the comms. There's a huge amount of effort into that. There are limits to what we can tell the public, particularly if they are impacted by commercial matters, and we don't want to do that for a whole range of reasons. So that's probably why there is some detail that's not being fed out into the public, because we have some large, complex commercial negotiations about to be commenced with the Link Alliance, and we don't want to be running part of those negotiations through the media. Is probably why that would be the answer there.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Ferry. I think if we can identify which presenter, if that's possible, or otherwise I'll just get Barry to direct your question to the appropriate person. Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's for David. I hope so. At slide 41, it states, if Henderson improvements are funded. That's the first time I've heard the funding being under threat. Is it under threat?
In terms of the scale of what we think is necessary to do versus what's funded at the moment, yes, there's a gap.
What happens if it's not funded? What happens to the services?
Well, probably Christian can talk a little bit more about it, but we'll have more services terminating. I think you might have to help me here, Christian. where would be terminate. There'll be some turning at Mount Eden, so you'd get a slightly lower frequency, out west.
Yes, we will have to stop the services that would reach Henderson at Newmarket if we don't have the Henderson improvements funded.
Okay, I'll pick my jaw up off the floor and reserve my right to speak on this, but I've got one more question. Sorry, yeah.
Sorry, maybe if I can also answer Councillor Perry's question about the Tūnuku.
Sorry, if I can just respond to that, Councillor Henderson. There's a funding request that's coming, as I mentioned, and that's presentation to Mayor and Ministers next week. The Henderson question will come up in that, and if we can leave it till then and work through it then, if that's okay.
I've got one more. Sorry, thank you. I've got one more. I've got an idea on how we can save money, particularly capital cost. Slide 38. Can we do Swanson instead of Henderson? That's a hell of a lot cheaper. And it actually benefits West Auckland residents more.
Perhaps if I just respond to that as well, David, because that is something that's been looked at in quite some detail, and I'm sure that will come up in the discussions when we talk about the commercial side as well.
Thank you. I reserve my right to speak. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson.
We have looked at both options.
Councillor Turner, then Councillor Newman.
My question is for Mr. Gordon. You've touched on it as you presented. This huge big beast, which is CRL, is going to use lots of energy. On a percentage scale, what's the increase on Auckland's power consumption that this will be when it's up and running, you know, both the rolling stock and all the fixed structure, etc.?
I wouldn't be competent to say what the draw, let's just say, would be on the stations. In terms of the traction power, it's actually not that great because in electrical terms, it's actually only 3.5 kilometres of additional track. So once we've built our substation out west and resolved with Counties Power and got the substation out east, the network will have sufficient resilience of power that even if one of those substations go down, we're fine. But I think everyone knows that we're built, demand on the electrical grid is just going to grow and grow as we decarbonise. So it is another draw on what are already stretched networks.
Excuse if I may, just the draw won't be by the extra length as much as by the doubling of the activity, is that correct?
Yeah, although the draw from trains is less related to the level of activity and more to the related to the amount of acceleration you have at the same time. It doesn't take a great base load, but it's quite peaky. So it's sort of the worst type of power you want.
Thank you.
We require quite a lot of resilience to draw what is fundamentally not a very great deal of amount of power.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Turner. Councillor Newman.
Good morning and thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of questions. I think I'll start, Christian, this might be for you first. Level 3 readiness of the rail network, it refers to removal of several pedestrian rail crossings to comply with the regulator's mandate. Which ones, or how many are several, and which ones, and what's the mandate?
I don't have the list of names right here, but I will forward that to you. We've got 6 pedestrian level crossings that the regulator has asked us to close or grade separate, and 1 road level crossing on Shore Street East.
Okay, if I could get that information soon, I'd be very grateful if you could email that through to me. Probably my next questions, Chair, would be directed to David Gordon from KiwiRail. Mr. Gordon, I appreciate your candour. You're from Wellington, so you're not directly affected by the experience, but my constituents sure will be. You refer to the issue with respect to awareness of the maintenance issues on the network and the need for an intervention now. I assume that you're framing the need for the shutdown for the rebuild in the context of, preparation for CRL, but I mean, when was the state of this particular ground and subground infrastructure decay? When was that? When did you become aware of that? I know that you're doing it now because of CRL, but you also referred to there's been a challenge with the cost allocation for the underlying maintenance issues now, which has been ongoing for a very long time, and so we're now dealing with that. When was this first something that became a problem that needed an intervention, or is it an intervention now because of the project that's forthcoming?
It's I think, Councillor, a really good question, because clearly we were aware for many years, well before this was even thought of, that the rail was built at a time, particularly around the waterfront in the east, for an axle load of 8 tonnes, right? And we run 18 tonnes across that. So it's well known that it was built on foundations for X, and we're operating for foundations for Y. We would not be doing, however, and your second point is bang on, we would not be doing the level of acceleration of work into this, because you can live with it. And we have been chipping away at it over the years, and will continue to do so. But we would not be going the level of intervention we're doing without the City Rail Link, because post the City Rail Link, we don't believe we will have the moral or access rights to do the necessity of work. And I know that is a point of dispute between, it's a point of discussion between ourselves and other councillors as to whether you do it all before or do it afterwards. It's been known for a long time. Our ability to have it funded is much shorter. We only got the ability under the Land Transport Management Act to be funded for this type of work from Waka Kotahi in 2020. So we've been seeking the money for a while, our ability to do it for a while, but City Rail Link is the catalyst, without doubt.
And so you do the work that you're proposing to do, is that it? Or do you expect that, once you start to pick at this, how much further we're going to have to go here? Is this a project with an end, or this is a project where we open it up and by God we're going to find a whole lot more mess, which is going to just require an intervention for longer, deeper, more dramatic, more expensive? Give me your reflection on this, because I want to know what the experience will be for my constituents.
Right, and I'll be as straightforward as I can. We've ground surveyed, ground penetrated, done test pits and the like throughout the network. So we've got a fairly firm idea of where the 25 k's of rebuild needs to be done. Anyone who's ever pulled a piece of wall or off on a house renovating know you sometimes find something, and clearly we have allowed in our programming for a certain number of items to go, to be found and go wrong. I believe our programming though is sufficiently robust at this stage to say that the timings we have will lead to the close up. But I wanted to take councillors a little bit further beyond. Let's just say, and this is all finished. The network involves steel on steel. Running a railway involves steel on steel and involves things wearing out. The performance of the trains on the network is driven half by the performance of the train and half by the performance of the network. We will perpetually, people talk about painting the fourth bridge in Scotland. Well, the fourth bridge is a rail bridge. You get to one end and you come to the other. We will perpetually be doing that type of repairs. But what we won't be doing is the deep dig out type repairs that we're doing in this period. And that's the difference. So if you want a cast iron guarantee, I know exactly what's happening beneath the earth ever in Auckland, in the Auckland corridor. I can't give you that. I can say that I'm confident my team has done all reasonable investigations that they can possibly do, short of actually pulling the rails up and starting to dig.
And the concluding follow on from that, Chair, is I mean, we still, to me, it doesn't seem that we've addressed the fundamental cost allocation for the underlying maintenance. And local government is renowned for actually not doing the maintenance on the infrastructure that's required to do. That's a real bane of the lives of people in Auckland. Once we've done this, is there a settled approach as to who's going to own the asset management plan for the purpose of consequential maintenance for this new infrastructure?
If I can start on that one, but Christian probably want to chip in.
We'll maybe bring
So
up
firstly,
Barry.
this...
Barry.
Look, I'm happy to answer it quite briefly. It comes down to asset ownership. The asset ownership work is still in place at a rough level, stations and track. That process is being worked through at the moment, and we'll have more detail in the next few months. However, there is provision that I understand has been made in the RLTP for some maintenance around that, and part of the process is working out what is actually in there, what's been provided for, and the adequacy of that.
Well, Barry, the question therefore is that if some funding has been provided in the RLTP, is that new funding in the RLTP, or is that a reallocation of the existing maintenance renewals money within the RLTP? Because if it's from the existing funding envelope, there's an opportunity cost to that.
I understand that some of that is earmarked for CRL, but the actual quantum and detail I can't tell you off the top of my head. I don't know that. Maybe.
We can talk about that.
I just wanted to say that for the stations, Auckland Transport has signed a contract, firm price, to Downer for the next 30 years that covers the maintenance and the renewals. So everything that is customer facing and system related that will come to AT, that's covered, and it's in our long-term plan.
Right, thank you, Christian. And if it lasts as long as the fourth rail bridge, we'll all be doing well. That was built in 1899, I think. Just before we move on to Councillor Lee, for the benefit of the councillors who have just joined the meeting, Barry Potter has said that the update on the financial matters of the CRL will be occurring on December 9, so we can save any questions to then.
That will be a briefing to ministers and mayor, and then after that, just need to remember that anything from that will need to go through to both cabinet and to the governing body. And any communications around under the sponsors agreement, any communications around those matters need to be joint communications between both sponsors, Crown and Council. So we need to be mindful of that. Councillor Lee.
Thank you. I guess it'll be like one of those bills you receive and you don't want to open the envelope. But Mr. Chairman, may I preface my questions with a remark?
Certainly.
Sure. I just want to say I've been a supporter of the CRL from its inception. This is this version. It was originally mooted in the 1950s, 1940s actually, and tragically it wasn't built then. The World War II generation tended to overachieve in terms of building things on time and under budget. But I've been a supporter. I just want to make a point here before I ask questions that it's important to remember what this stuff, what this civil works, what these rail improvements are for. They're for our people. They're for train users in this case. And that should not be forgotten. It's easy to reify something so that the thing itself becomes the total objective. But the CRL, the tunnel, the link tunnel is really to service people using trains in a more efficient way. I want to thank Dr. Sweeney, Mr. Mezzalin and Mr. Gordon for the presentation. I have some questions going back to, I think, Mr. Mezzalin, relating to Britomart changes. We know that the CRL was necessitated in the end because a Britomart station did not have the capacity and obviously didn't have the physical throughput to cater for growth. But now I'm concerned to hear that as a offset of this project, Britomart, its platforms in Britomart are to be removed. And one of the incentives, one of the reasons why I was a champion of the CRL was that improving the throughput or making it a through station would enable services, provincial services, and we can think of Te Huia, or we can think of the Northern Explorer to Wellington, could come into Britomart with enormous convenience and benefits for passengers and therefore patronage. But I'm now concerned that Tūāhanga services are going to be truncated because of that, because of this work, permanently, I understand. And that, again, is counterintuitive in my mind in regard to we're here to serve the people and rail is to serve the people. Just give us a brief response on that, please.
Thank you, Councillor. Just one thing. The end state for Britomart is 4 platforms, 2 throughputs and 2 terminating platforms. For the time being, no services is envisaged to terminate at Britomart. All services will go through. So the two platforms will be used as spare for resilience, but will also could be used for interregional services. When CRL opens, the through platforms will be for 9 car, the end platform, terminal platform for 6 car trains, but with the future proofing to be extended to 9 car at a future stage. So as part of the Tūāhanga line matters, they are terminating at Newmarket now while we are doing the works because we don't have enough capacity at Britomart now, since it's a terminating station for all the other services. As far as when CRL opens, no decision has been made yet. As I explained, the CRL gives us full flexibility to run the services as we may wish. We are about to model the train plan, and we'll come to the AT board with options, and then we'll go to consultation, and that includes how we will deal with the Tūāhanga line.
Just to be brief, can you confirm that services from Hamilton, services from Wellington, and services from Tūāhanga will not be able to use Britomart after these changes?
As I said, we are currently modeling the train plan and the timetables. I cannot confirm anything. As soon as that work is being undertaken by our rail operator in collaboration with Rail, we will come up to the AT board with the result of that work.
Thank you. Another question. Mr. Gordon talked about a fire hose and a garden hose, and I was quite taken with that analogy. The water in the hose are the passengers, not just hoses. It won't work unless you have water in either hose. And the assumption is there's going to be a huge amount of water being compressed into a network that can't manage it. I think somewhat of an exaggeration. However, are you aware of the current level of rail patronage in Auckland? And Mr. Gordon, are you aware of that level, current level?
Clearly, I am, Councillor Lee. You and I spoke about this the other day. Yes, I am.
Probably unfair. It's about less than half of what it was before COVID. COVID restrictions essentially were lifted a year ago. It's lower than during COVID, actually. And so we do know that the people who seem to be not considered adequately in these plans haven't come back to rail. The last time we had 8 to 9 million was back in the days of the Auckland Regional Council and building every year, and that was before electrification. So if the people don't turn up, the CRL is going to be dressed up with nowhere to go, and hence our concern that this rebuild of the formation, the substrate, be done in a way that retains as much patronage as possible and not be fixated on having everything perfect for the opening of the CRL, because if the people don't turn up, if patronage doesn't increase, it's going to be something of an anticlimax. So we just ask you to bear that in mind. And other councillors have talked about the plan concerning replacement buses, given the crisis, serious crisis we have with buses in Auckland, relying on that. I'll just make another point if I could.
Just, Councillor Lee, if I could just interrupt you there. I think, thanks for the questions, but I think we've got quite a number of people who've still to answer their questions here. I think we're about due for a little break. I think there's too many people to ask, so we'll maybe just have a break for 5 minutes and then come back. There's too many questions.
Sure, I'll leave off here then, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. And then we'll pick up with Councillor Bartley, Member Taipari, Councillors Leone, Hills, Walker and Ferry. So if we could just have a quick 5-minute break and we'll be back. Thank you.